One of the most common patterns of cash flow that students have to deal with in the classroom and people have to deal with in their daily lives is the so-called ordinary annuity, which is a formal description of a series of constant, equal in amount cash flows which will happen at regular intervals over a specified time period. And because it is an ordinary annuity, which is the formal term for an annuity in so-called arrears, one of the key characteristics of that particular cash flow pattern is that there is no cash flow today times zero, and the first one happens one period away from today. At the other end of the timeline, and this is not as well understood in my experience as an educator over many years in this topic, is that the future value of that particular cash flow stream is calculated at time n, which is the last of the dates on which a cash flow occurs, and it is calculated after the final cash flow has happened. Something else about that timeline, those notches are of course labeled 1, 2, 3 up to the last one being n, but because we are now already familiar with the principle that we need to be absolutely consistent between the periodic rate that we apply to our calculations and the identification of the exact length of that period, we are now, I believe, well placed to dive into this particular kind of TVM calculation on the understanding that those notches 1, 2, 3 are not necessarily years, nor are they necessarily months. They could be anything at all. And in this example 5, we'll be looking at a number of situations about the length of that period. Let's take a look at part A, which is asking us to calculate the present value of 12 monthly payments of a particular amount starting 1 month from today. And that is a key kind of commonality with these so-called ordinary annuities, that the first cash flow payment or receipt, whichever one it is, will be one period away from today. And because in this case we're looking at months, it is 1 month away from today. And there is a rate that we have seen before being prime rate, and that we know is a particular special name in South Africa for a stated annual rate compounded monthly. Therefore, in any TVM calculation, we need to count months, in this case 12. The periodic rate is not the annual rate, rather it is the per month rate. The payment is 10,000, and we calculate the present value. Moving on to part B, we are asked to calculate the payment. The main thing about this particular part of example 5 is to be very clear that there is no complication in part B, in the sense that if you look at that starting point for the first cash flow and you think that is 3 months away from today, therefore that this is a weirdly complicated situation that you've never seen before, where there is nothing in the cash flow stream at times 1 and 2, and then it only begins at time 3, that is not correct, because everything here is consistent. Because it is quarterly payments, which are every 3 months. And in fact, the rate given to you is a stated rate compounded quarterly. So everything is consistent, and that first payment you would expect to see only 3 months from today, because that is 1 quarter away from today. And having cleared your thoughts about that, it is very straightforward to do the calculation of the payment, making sure that you get the number of periods correct. There are 20 quarters in 5 years, and the per quarter rate is 11 divided by 4, which is 2.75%. Moving on to the final part of example 5, which asks us to calculate the rate. We have a requirement here to do a 2-step process. That is because the TVM calculations provide us with and use the periodic rate, not the annual rate. And in this case, we are dealing with a per month rate. And when we solve in the first step of the answer to part C, when we solve for the rate, we have and must remember that we have a per month rate of 0.7916%, and that the question asks us for the prime rate being the stated annual rate compounded monthly, which means that to get to the correct answer, we need to multiply that by 12.